Hi, and good afternoon. Just want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Let you know you're in the right place. Going to allow about another minute or so for everyone to file in and get settled. Hello, once again, everyone. Going to get going in about 30 seconds. Allow a little more time for everyone to get settled in.
I was looking at the attendee list to see if I recognized anybody, and I'm curious if Steve Hunter, is that our Steve Hunter? You raise your hand or react with an emoji if it's our Steve Hunter. If not, it's just a fun coincidence of name. Oh, it is. Well, awesome, bud. Thanks for joining. I even some of our our sellers are on the call, so got a good audience then. And any questions that we can't answer, we'll toss to back to the audience, and Steve can help us with that.
All righty. Well, no, an official hello now to everyone, including Mr. Hunter, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast, Manufacturing, a look at industry and safety insights, sponsored by Howard Light Hearing Protection. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health Magazine, and will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start a presentation, but first let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we'll conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and we'll let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived, so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speakers today are Mark Kirsch, Ami Radu, and Kevin Sikorsky, all representing the Howard Light brand. Mark serves as Global Marcom Leader, PPE, where he specializes in overseeing communication strategies, branding, and promotional efforts for PPE products. Amy is a Senior Customer Marketing Specialist, Vertical Markets. She is responsible for executing integrated marketing campaigns across vertical markets that rely on PPE to keep workers safe. Kevin works as a National Product Sales Manager. He's a safety professional with over 15 years of experience serving multiple industries and holds certifications including QSSP, OSHA 30, and Competent Instructor. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. Ami, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome everyone. It's lovely to have you here. Today, we are going to discuss a bit about the context of manufacturing, how it is one of the largest and most diverse industries out there, and about the incredible output that we are expecting from this industry moving forward, and of course, about the main challenges and opportunities affecting manufacturing today. And last but not least, we are going to take you through what is important in regards to safety on the job, hazards both seen and unseen. And with that being said, let's get right into it. Manufacturing, as we all know, is a global industry that occurs in nearly every country and accounts for most trade between countries and companies. It occurs in nearly every single country, and not only does it account for majority of the trade between countries, it also accounts for a majority of the trade between companies. It is estimated that almost 80% of the international trade in the US is manufactured goods. Global manufacturing companies employ a significant share of worldwide workforce, with about 14% of the global workforce population, which means almost 500 million workers. More so, about half of the global manufacturing employment happens in three countries: China, India, and the United States. Of course, that means that manufacturing offers very diverse career opportunities from assemblers, engineers, welders, machinists, electricians, operations, designers, researchers, fabricators, safety professionals, and even sales and marketing professionals just like us. And PPE will vary based on the hazard you are facing, but we will get into that in a little bit. Before we get into overall marketing output, let's have a look at MVA, or the net output of the manufacturing sector. Back in 2022, the worldwide manufacturing value-added production had surpassed $16 trillion. This is an indicator of the industrialization and overall economic development. It is typically expressed as a percentage of GDP, just for us to understand and to show the importance of manufacturing for the economy. 60% of this value originates in four countries, China, the United States, Japan, and Germany. The biggest players in the industry are energy, mining, and automotive company, accounting for the largest manufacturers by revenue in both 2022 and 2023. A higher MVA generally indicates a more advanced and productive manufacturing sector, which is a driver for economic growth, innovation, and job creation, which again, that means more people you have to keep safe. As we were already saying, manufacturing is one of the largest industries in the world and employs a significant workforce with over 500 million workers. Here you can see the market output expected for the following years, as the sector is expected to grow more and more every year in terms of trillion of US dollars. And having a look back at the biggest companies in terms of manufacturing, we can see that in 2022, we had companies from energy, mining, and automotive, which remain the biggest players in the manufacturing industries for 2023 as well. Because while the companies may change, the industries tend to stay consistent and just grow in terms of revenue and changing in players that account for the biggest companies in the sector. So this is an overall look at what manufacturing means and a short introduction, and I will hand it over to Mark to go a bit further in what is being produced where. Thank you.
Thanks, Ami. And just like Ami mentioned, right, manufacturing is global and it does include a wide variety of workforce. We are considered, even in our current roles, part of a manufacturing operation and global in nature. So Ami joined us from live from Romania as part of my team over there. So just a kind of a show of we're a very diverse workforce. We can handle things from a lot of different areas, and just kind of leads into this this presentation. Slide represents what is being produced by the really the top 10 manufacturing companies. China tops the list, right? It's been the leader since about 2010, I believe. And manufacture goods vary widely from country to country, and often as a result of what raw materials are available to them, or what engineering skills or labor pool differences. And of course, even financial investments can change the manufacturing output as well. So again, China tops the list with 31.6% of the total manufacturing output. Main exports are textiles, electronics, garments, and they're making a big play in products like solar panels and things to support climate change initiatives and automobiles, including even electric vehicles. United States used to have the world's largest manufacturing sector until China took it over in 2010. But with new legislation following the pandemic, to support domestic manufacturing in products like semiconductors, it's still in the running to take back top position. It might take a bit, but still in the running there. And there's a couple other reasons why we'll talk about in some of the next slides. And the U.S. primarily, it's automobiles, chemical products, food products, military equipment, and aircraft. Third place, Japan, 6.52%. They're doing vehicles, computer parts, electronics, and chemicals. Germany, as I think you can expect, known for motor vehicles, electrical machinery, manufactured metals. India is actually better known for information technology and their workforce and customer service centers, but also accounts for 2.87% of global manufacturing output and exports agricultural products, textiles, engineering goods, leather, and other chemicals. And at nearly a third of its economy, manufacturing is incredibly important for South Korea. So they're, at 2.7% of the world's output, but has significant exports like automobiles, petroleum, manufacture or machinery, electronics, etc. Russia's known for exporting fuels, iron, other metals, pharmaceuticals, and plastic. The UK, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are mostly chemicals, manufactured good and food products. And tied with the UK for eighth place, Italy also contributes 1.8% and relies on manufacturing and heavily on industrialization and exports of metal products, clothing, footwear, vehicles. Mexico primarily exports mineral fuels, lubricants, food, transport equipment, and machinery. And, just kind of hanging on to the bottom there is France, which, agricultural products, machinery, aircraft, and hydrocarbon. Jumping into some of the opportunities for growth, it's important to remember that the global manufacturing industry lost almost 8 trillion in value in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I know a lot of us don't want to talk about COVID-19. We don't want to talk about the pandemic. We want to put it in our rearview mirror, but the industry has shifted, and with it, new strategies, new technologies. In 2023, the US manufacturing industry capitalized on the momentum of these three significant pieces of legislation that are shown on the screen here. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. These three laws were designed to rebuild infrastructure, advance some of the clean energy initiatives, reposition the domestic semiconductor industry as a major manufacturing sector. If you've seen some of these plants, I mean, they're the size of cities. It's incredible how large they are and where they're being built. But through these different initiatives, right, or though like through approving funds and tax initiatives into a variety of sectors, right, this is really building on the investment in the manufacturing industry. Funding commitments are also nearly double the commitments made in these sectors through 2021. So just additional investment, and a lot of that is into the smart energy and some of those other areas. So $88 billion has been committed to nearly 200 new clean energy manufacturing facilities that has a potential to create over 75,000 new jobs. So again, more people to keep safe. At that, I'm going to ask the team to launch a couple of polls here. So the first one is, do you believe that smart factory solutions will be a primary driver of competitiveness in the next 5 years? Yes, no, or unsure. I'll give you a moment to check the box there. I'm gonna actually vote myself as well. Oh, it won't let me. I'm joking. I thought it said hosts and panelists can vote. It says cannot. Awesome. So with about 63% saying yes, I think it's clear there that it is considered a primary driver. And I think there are some folks that are still unsure. So that's fine. I think you should be unsure. I think the market says that we're unsure. So we'll take a look at some of that in the upcoming slides. If you want to go ahead and launch or the next question here, poll 2. So where have you benefited for those, again, the 63%, or even the ones who are still unsure if they're benefiting? Where have you benefited from undertaking smart factory initiatives? And while you're doing that, I'll say, even, a close personal friend of mine that lives down the street, I won't say the industry because most of the folks would probably be able to tell based on where I'm located and where they're located, what kind of industry it is or who they are. Um, but even they took some smart factory upgrades and had challenges, right? And like it's one of those things where like the investment up front might be $2 million. And if you make that investment up front, you might be able to reap all those benefits slowly. But if you're only investing $200,000 at a time, you're often having to band-aid that fix or band-aid that solution. And that's something that you see a lot in manufacturing. All right, great. So the results are in. We see, safety and sustainability, 55%. Awesome. It makes sense because you're, safety and health professionals. Asset efficiency, product quality. So very split. So I really love that. And, I want to capture some of those for our own results after the fact. I think that's great. Thank you for taking the time to take the poll. I'm going to jump in. So here is, one of the industry polls that we reference in our industry report on manufacturing, and says, actual growth may be slow in the immediate years ahead. Again, kind of some of those struggles you might be seeing, but longer term opportunities are super substantial. Many of these opportunities did arise during the pandemic when certain problems were uncovered, whether it's supply chain interruptions, having single source suppliers or other issues with components, and digitalization of manufacturing is at one of at the top of the list to capitalize on these opportunities. So, again, kind of looking at surveyed manufacturers that benefited from those smart manufacturing initiatives, we over-indexed, right? This population obviously being a safety group, safety end users, we had, I think it was like 49%. Definitely see some benefits there, I think, as well as asset efficiency and product quality, and even eventually driving down some of those costs. And I think we had 63%. I think if you added ours with our unknown, we're at probably the same amount of, 86% of surveyed manufacturing executives believe that those smart solutions are a primary driver of competitiveness. So I think we were close. If you added some of the folks that are unsure, maybe we just need to convince them a little bit about, hey, these might actually be a big driver. But in this context, smart factories that are incorporating these things such as, data analytics, cloud computing, Internet of Things, sensors and devices throughout that process are really seeing some of those benefits. I'll show you a little bit on this next slide. It's a lot. I'm not going to cover all of it. It's probably an eye test if you're trying to look at everything on it. What I'm going to do is point to the fact that industrial safety has some key categories for these smart manufacturing systems. So, burner management, emergency shutdown systems, fire and gas monitoring systems, machinery controls, high pressure protection systems. All of these are areas where monitoring can be incredibly beneficial. That same friend I mentioned who works down the street from me has to use our Howard Light maximum earplugs at all times on their manufacturing facility because of a blow off valve that will go off erratically throughout the day. Something like that, if it has a monitoring system, if it can actually allow the employees to get significant advance notice, you might even just be able to grab a pair of earmuffs, put them on for that 10 seconds, and that's all you need to do for the rest of the day instead of keeping an earplug in all day long. So again, some of these things that can be used to shift or change some of the behaviors are what we're seeing in the market. I'm going to take a second to get a drink of water too, because nonstop talking is fun, especially when everyone's been fighting off these seasonal allergies and colds. On the opportunities for growth side, I have a couple of graphs on here. The top one is showing that a combined annual growth rate of 17.2% is expected in smart manufacturing market. So it just shows, that is growing. It's expected to really balloon by 2028. And you can see like North America and Asia Pacific are really two of the major drivers of that growth. And then on the other side of it, right, the 45.6% growth is expected on artificial intelligence and kind of how that can work. I know it's super confusing. It's sometimes even intimidating to think about AI and how it's used in these things. But I'll talk a little bit about even how we use it in product design or some of the other areas, maybe not on the manufacturing floor, but in the design process. So smart factory concept is going to see substantial growth around the world. Um, the companies are exploring the concept of this industrial metaverse. But as much as the manufacturing industry may be excited about an industrial metaverse, the factory-wide deployments are still unrealistic for most companies. And I think that's what I was talking about a little bit before of like a $2 million capital investment may not be possible. So those significant upfront costs are leading to a longer return on their investment. We're patching or we're leading to that improvement, but we're doing it incrementally versus all at once. And I can see that is a popular thing that is happening. But the industrial metaverse, right, really has a implementation on or impact in employee training, collaboration, production planning, remote expert assistance. These are some of the smaller scale projects that are less expensive but can yield some of the quicker results in manufacturing. So once the business case is established, these manufacturers can scale their deployments as needed. Generative AI, again, while still early in the phases of implementation, can improve efficiencies in areas like product design. Right, kind of around the corner from me sits our user experience group, and they're often using the AI to tweak designs or to look at improvements and kind of envision things that a human designer might not be able to envision. I think I saw some of the new concepts for hearing protectors on a big giant billboard down the hall. It's awesome. I think it really does inspire creativity and gives us a good look at some of the ways that is being used. Even in aftermarket services, supply chain management, um, if it's successfully integrated in smart factories, it will lead to some of those innovations in and increased productivity, or even the creation of new types of jobs, and even enhancing profit margins. The growth potential for this technology is high. Um, Robotics are another area, right, that we're seeing as far as predicted to grow substantially. Smart robotics might decrease employment in some areas, but it leads to new job opportunities in other areas. We saw this as a team. We went to the BMW facility in Spartanburg, and you could see like all of this technology, or even like creating some machinery that does automatic welding. There's still people who are observing and checking the work, or working on that machinery and keeping it up and running, because again, it's critical to the manufacturing process. The other thing that I want to point to is that's really neat and kind of interesting from our perspective is that our team on our training side actually uses AR training as a tool to aid in both like training, like ladder training, and even inspections. So they'll do augmented reality in an app-based system, allows you to look at the different ladder rungs and assess, what your fall protection system should be when observing that specific ladder at that height and at those rungs. Or even doing, like you see here, it's showing how to inspect the different critical fail points on a harness. Something that's unique, right? And not even everybody on our side even realizes that these things exist. But a lot of companies are using this when they're deploying their safety products. So really cool. Jumping into some of the challenges as we look ahead, right? While smart factories and digital transformation in general will be important to the future of manufacturing, many manufacturers are not yet able to take advantage of these opportunities that they enable. So increased borrowing costs as a result of higher interest rates, as well as increased costs of raw materials or components are definitely challenging, especially when some of these new technologies like AI will take a lot of time or even some significant amount of time after implementation to demonstrate their operational and financial results. Following the pandemic and a variety of geopolitical tensions, I think I mentioned this a little bit of like why we might see a shift and even some of the US manufacturing growth is the idea of friendshoring. It became a buzzword in the last few years in manufacturing to convey, the decision by companies to move their facilities to more friendly countries. Again, manufacturing companies are wanting to avoid volatile regions that could disrupt their production, disrupt their workforce, and really, you know, can put a challenge to that, right? Like they might have a lack of skills or experience and even technical means to bring production closer to home. So it's a challenge, but it's something that we're seeing and should present growth opportunities regionally. There's also a growing focus on environmental, social, and governance. So ESG as manufacturing requirement to ensure materials are ethically sourced or operations are safe or they don't negatively impact the local environment. So to accomplish this, right, you're going to see manufacturers are needing to invest in technologies that build a digital thread of sorts to even show their ESG criteria throughout the entire product's useful life. Not just how it's created, how it's disposed of, how it's recycled afterwards. Is there another use? That's posing a significant amount of challenges for all of us. And then a number of federal funding opportunities and incentives are easing the drive towards net zero emissions. But that challenge is really remains to implement the actual strategies. I think the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, provided 270 billion in climate and clean energy related incentives, including more than 40 billion in U.S. tax credits to expand manufacturing of electric vehicles, batteries, or clean energy. However, the funding alone doesn't really provide all the necessary solutions. So companies, as they work to electrify or decarbonize their operations and end products, face that technical challenge of those high initial costs, as we mentioned, transitioning the production processes, and even for those who are directly related into like EV components, right? The new complex supply chains for batteries are crucial for those rare earth minerals. So you're seeing some of that, in the political scene as well. Like kind of where are we finding access to those rare earth minerals and where rare earth metals? More than half of the manufacturing companies recently surveyed said that they've also been targeted by ransomware. Kind of a weird one, right? Like thinking about cybersecurity in manufacturing or safety, but it's kind of wild. Like 7 out of 10 of these attacks were malicious data encryption. Manufacturing was also the most targeted sector for ransomware targeted attacks in 2022 for the second consecutive year. So it's something that we're seeing is significant. And as manufacturers are moving towards that digital transformation, the AI, the robotics, all of those things, right? That those cybersecurity risks will become more commonplace. So as we're embracing the advantages of smart factories and digital innovations, it's also easy for us to overlook the risks in some of these other areas. And again, creating other thought streams, other work streams in the process. So an equal focus needs to be on how we protect systems like the supply chain and proprietary and sensitive data with these new ventures that we're undertaking. Then, according to U.S. Census Bureau, right, there's over 12 million people working in manufacturing, so it makes it's the nation's fifth largest employer. And it's a considerable bounce back after a prolonged period of decline. and a lot of massive offshoring of production. The workforce continues to reflect the population at large, but a few things or a few shifts are expected. Manufacturing is still 30% female, still lags behind the overall workforce of about 47%. Some of the room for improvement is in leadership positions where women make up 25% of senior management. This, this may also be a way to ease both worker shortages and inflation as the supply of labor is available. The National Association of Manufacturers has an objective specifically for women to account for 35% of the manufacturing workforce by 2030. So you might see just some of those additional shifts and approaches as you're moving into the next couple of years. In addition to that shift, something that I found was really incredible about optimizing the workforce was related to military experience, and it the idea that military experience translates smoothly to manufacturing careers, and the National Association of Manufacturers really was looking at a readiness project to make military experience understandable to civilian employers. So they did a digital credentialing system where military service members are actually awarded digital badges based on their role and the training they received on the job. This provides future employers a clear way to understand how that military experience has prepared them for a career specifically in manufacturing. So across all 5 branches of the military, these badges are aligned to more than 300 military occupation codes and include expertise in things like workplace safety, right? Like you're all safety professionals, or a lot of you are safety professionals. Someone who has experience keeping people safe, keeping lives, that can translate directly, right? Quality, environmental inspections, emergency response, maintenance, they're all equally applicable in manufacturing as they are in military operations. So it's really, really just an interesting thing about optimizing that workforce as we move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about, optimizing safety next. So let me keep going here. Just wanted to show this slide mainly because I find it fun, right? I know we don't want to talk about COVID, and that's behind us, and I know I mentioned that a couple of times, but one of the unique challenges, right, was even across all of these different types of manufacturing was workers doing multiple jobs in different areas of their facilities, and that posed huge risks for safety. I think each and every one of you probably has faced some kind of challenges related to this, even just worker supply chain, right? Did you have enough workers on the job to do the tasks that you needed to manufacture your goods? It's something that we were challenged with. It's something we had to make critical decisions about, when you look at employees that are considered critical in the workforce in the US, even somebody like in the food production business, that changed how we manufactured our hearing protection, and we maybe ramped down on some of the areas of more general protection and ramped up the metal detectable hearing for use in the food industry. So it's kind of an interesting way that we've seen that shift. And this is a challenge, especially when people are kind of moving, from job to job, or during the day they're on one machine and they're moving to another machine, and it specifically poses, especially for hand protection, right? When you think of trying to show like different cut levels or protection levels for your gloves, if you move from a packaging operation where you're using a cut level 1, and then now you're cutting hose, or you're cutting rope or something, you're not wearing the same glove you should be wearing when you're doing that cutting operation. You really need to move up to a higher level of protection. Same thing with hearing, right? As you're using PPE, you really need to know what that worker is exposed to throughout the facility. Jumping into protecting workers and businesses, I think that's the kind of the critical piece of manufacturing workers, right? It's the heartbeat of our industry, making sure that that worker is related to getting that good through and built and out the door. And manufacturing is inherently dangerous for many of its workers, and keeping them safe on the jobs, not just the right thing to do from a humanitarian perspective, but it also helps protect the business equipment, protect the assets, and positively impact the financial success of your operations. So, neglecting worker safety, right? I think you all know this can lead to multi-million-dollar lawsuits, erode public trust, and really the human costs involved are critical. And so I showed, this chart. I know it's a little hard to follow the lines there, but manufacturing is number 10. So you can see, it's pretty high up there as far as the death rate per capita, right, per 100,000 workers, and even the non-fatality work rate. So we'll take a look at that on the next slide a little bit more. So again, this is a little bit of an older chart, but it's one that I really liked because it is showing that per capita, like per 100,000 employees, how many are getting injured in those areas of manufacturing. Yeah, who knew food products were so dangerous, right? I think most of us were kind of we take for granted. We go into our cabinet, we grab our box of cereal, and we pour it out and we eat it, right? We don't think of, oh man, like somebody, like they had to process the grain, they had to load that, they had to keep the respiratory hazards from having loose particles in the air, to processing it on machinery, adding to the mix, making a complex process, right? There's all hazards throughout that whole thing, whether it be, cutting, slicing, dicing, moving machinery parts, pinch hazards. They're all things that we're seeing. And according to the National Safety Council, right, they also list the, most common reasons for these injuries in manufacturing are contact with objects and equipment, right? Things are moving all around you. Overexertion. Maybe you're doing that repetitive task for 8 hours a day. That can lead to overexertion, right? Thinking about, maybe you do rotate some of your workforce, or you change their jobs up a little bit, standing, sitting, moving, etc. Falls, slips, and trips, right? I used to work in a frozen pizza manufacturing company, and the third shift was all just cleaning, and they essentially flooded the entire job floor, and you could ice skate on it. I mean, it was wet and soapy and all that, but that's what it required to make sure it got clean for everyone else afterwards. But if someone's not making sure that that's dry and sweeped up or squeegeed before that, the workforce in shift one comes in, you could potentially have falls, slips, and trips, and someone's going to get hurt. Again, repetitive emotion, kind of similar to the overexertion, exposure to harmful substances. Again, kind of what I talked about, like you're loading in, explosive materials or grains or other things, right? You have to make sure you're protected in, your eyes are protected, your respiratory is protected. And there's different sectors have a different area of risk, right? So you can kind of see, wood and paper products, rubber, plastic, all of these on here can really lead to some additional risks, right? Many manufacturers should wear everything from safety goggles to hearing protection, right? You have the dust, the dirt, the debris, you have the contaminants, the bioaerosols, infectious agents. You need steel toe boots to guard and protect your feet. I think I missed that before. The gloves from cuts, burns, chemicals. And even depending on your factory, right, you might even require head protection, depending if you have any overhead hazards. And then there's also, like, the specialty areas of maintenance and kind of material handling. So you think of even arc flashes or confined space hazards. Someone going into the tanks to clean them, to go into something that's a confined space, needing to make sure that they're also protected, as well as it's not just on the line doing the assembly, but also maintaining that equipment. Most of the attention is the hazards you feel and see. But I think as or maybe noted, this is sponsored by Howard Light. So it's also about the hearing hazards, or what more than meets the eye. So, in a minute, Kevin's going to go jump into that. But I think, like I mentioned, some of these hazardous areas, right? I think probably the one that I've been to, or actually was on a job floor that was probably the scariest to me was probably the wood products. I was in a lumber mill, and I don't think I've been in a crazier environment just from the amount of hazards that I've seen from the physical hazards of all these planers cutting, quick, fast moving machinery, zipping, logs all around this thing. Um, but I also want to say that's the only place I've ever been on the job where I actually got hit by the safety manager, and it was well deserved. So, again, just kind of tying in, right? Like I was aware of my physical surroundings. I was aware of the fact that there was sharp, materials and everything. But all I did was adjust my earmuffs for a split second, and that the lovable safety manager smacked me probably as hard as she could to remind me, because she said, you of all people should know better and should be having your hearing protection on. And I was thankful, because it was the loudest environment I've ever been in my life, and at the time didn't even really realize that even a few seconds could make a big difference in my hearing health for my lifetime. And so, again, those invisible hazards leads me to passing it over to my friend Kevin Sikorsky. So Kevin, why don't you take us home with the last few slides, and then see if we got any Q&A going on. So
Thanks, Mark. Hey, everyone. I'm going to take a couple times to just reiterate, or a couple minutes to reiterate some of the points that Mark just made. Right, he did a really good job outlining all of the hazards that we run into throughout the manufacturing process. But one that we really, obviously, being sponsored by Howard Light today, we want to focus on hearing protection. There's a few reasons. So I'm not going to have time to dig into really all of the data and everything that goes behind noise-induced hearing loss. But I encourage you, if you want to learn more, to please go back and look through the webinar archives that we have. I've done a couple of Hearing Basics 101 trainings for anyone that joined the most recent food and beverage webinar. It has really good information that gives a lot of the background and how we do that we're just not going to have enough time to cover today. But what is noise-induced hearing loss, right? It is simply damage that is caused here by overexposure to noise. What we boil it down to, right, is 4 P's. It's painless, permanent, progressive, and then the good thing is that it's preventable. Painless and progressive are 2 that I want to really kind of highlight here, right? Because unless the noise is incredibly loud, like that environment Mark was talking about, right, 120, 130 decibels or louder, you're not going to really feel pain when you start to lose your hearing. And the challenge with that is that it's progressive, right? So every time you get that overexposure, it keeps getting worse and worse, and you don't really start to recognize it until it's too late. And that brings me down to the bottom of this slide here, where we talk about the OSHA standard, right? So the official OSHA standard is that the permissible exposure limit for an 8-hour shift is 90 decibels. The challenge there, right, is that if we're just OSHA compliant, that's actually not going to protect our workers. We're the only developed nation in the world that still uses that 90 decibel rating. What you really want to do as you develop your hearing conservation programs is please try to keep that time-weighted average threshold down below 85 decibels. And again, if you want more data on why that's so important, please go back into the archives and look at some of the other webinars, or reach out to your local Honeywell rep or Howard Light rep. We'd be happy to come out and do some training for your folks and dig into that. Go ahead, Mark. Next slide, please. So what is the impact here, right? Over 8 million Americans already suffer from noise-induced hearing loss. Okay, some of you might already be familiar with this slide if you've been through some of those other trainings. And as we talked about, OSHA does have requirements for this in place, right? And in fact, on average, they charge employers about $1.5 million per year in penalties for not protecting their workers from noise. Sounds like a big number, but when you spread it across the entire industry, across the entire economy in the US, $1.5 million is basically nothing. Where the impact comes in is in that second figure, right? We spend $242 million annually spent on workers' compensation claims for hearing loss disability. It's actually the #1 largest expense for workers' compensation claims, because that payment has to be sent out in perpetuity. It's a permanent, if you remember back to that last slide, it's a permanent injury. It's not like if you just fall, have a slip, trip, break your leg, go to the hospital, get a big bill, they write the check once and it's done. This has to continue to get paid out because of the permanence of the injury. And then on the right, we've just got some examples, and we'll go through some more of this in a better detail on the next slide. Mark, please. Thank you, sir. So in hearing loss in manufacturing specifically, right? This is a manufacturing specific training. Hearing loss is manufacturing's #1 top recorded occupational illness, okay? 1 out of every 9 recordable injuries in manufacturing is hearing impairment. So this is a huge deal. It happens more frequently than we recognize, right? There are 2 hazards that affect this. This slide right now, we're going to focus on the first one, which is obviously noise. And then on the second one, we'll dig into ototoxic chemicals. And that's something that hasn't gotten nearly as much attention, but has just as large of an impact in the manufacturing space. So just a couple on the bottom slide, right? A couple of examples of specific noise hazards in manufacturing, right? You can see, oxygen torches reaching up to 120 decibels, jackhammers 113 decibels. But even smaller things, just regular conveyor belts reach that 93 decibel threshold, right? So not only is it dangerous, but that's even louder than the inaccurate OSHA requirements. So as manufacturing professionals, we know how loud these facilities can be, but it's not just the really loud things, right? In comparison to a bulldozer, sure, that conveyor belt may seem quiet. And if you're used to being around some of those louder noises, and that's where you think you have to be protected against, you might not recognize that even the quote unquote quieter areas of the facility are still loud enough to be hazardous, and you have to maintain protection there as well. Like I talked about just a second ago, right? The biggest thing is that it's progressive. And when we talk about this being an invisible hazard and not something that's really easy to see, it's also one of the very, very few occupational hazards that doesn't stop when our workers leave the job, right? Noise exposure happens everywhere through our day-to-day life. We've got a really great a PDF poster file that we like to use. It's called a noise thermometer. And I just took a little bit of a snippet out of it here on the right-hand side so you guys can see. But on the left-hand side is non-occupational noise hazards. And on the right-hand side are occupational noise hazards, right? So, we've seen things again like bulldozers in that 100 decibel range, ambulance sirens, compactors, generators being super loud. When you slide over to the left there, you recognize, okay, well, I've got folks that ride their motorcycles to work every day. And if they're exceeding their time weighted average threshold at work, and then they hop on their motorcycle, which can reach 105 decibels, they're exposed there as well, right? Go to a sports stadium, 117 decibels, a rock concert, 120 decibels. And my favorite example that Mark and I used to like to play stump the industrial hygienist if we can, whenever we were at trade shows, we always like to ask, hey, what's louder, a bulldozer or a crying baby? And as someone with 2 young children in my house, I can attest it is the crying baby, right? Those shrieks can reach up to 110 decibels. So not only do we have to maintain and make sure our workers are protected on the job, but we want to make sure that they're protected to a level to where we're not exceeding that time weighted average, so that the exposure that we know they're inevitably going to see when they get home, we want to keep them below that threshold at work so they're not damaging their hearing in the long run from overexposure, compounded on top of the exposure they have. Thank you, Mark.
Before you move forward, Kevin, I'll say, like, one of the things I used to ask people in trainings and other things is like, what is your favorite sound? And like get the idea of like, hey, what's your favorite sound? Like, oh, my kid's laughter, my wife singing in the shower, whatever it is, right? And then I asked, well, like, well, what is a noise you consider hazardous? And it's really funny, the overlap of like somebody's sound can easily be somebody else's noise. I had, again in the South, asking somebody, what's your favorite sound? It's like, well, my John Deere tractor. And you're like, well, if you're on it all day long as your job, now that becomes a hazard, because you think about these things being noise that's repetitive all day long. It's no longer just a sound, it's noise. It can cause damage. So it's something to also think about while you're, on the job and at home. All right, go ahead, Kevin.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So the second piece, right, and this is where the science has developed relatively recently. It's still being explored and developed, but we've identified things that are called ototoxic chemicals, right, which are chemicals that exposure to it's actually poisonous to the ears. And the combined effects of those ototoxins plus the noise, right, can be synergistic, meaning that the hearing loss from that noise exposure is actually enhanced by the exposure from the chemicals, right? So those ototoxins can enter the body through, right, regular air passages and or just being exposure on the skin. So we've got a list down here of known and possible ototoxins. The list is much longer than just this, but these are some of the most known and regulated. So if you're working in a manufacturing facility and you're using anything like styrene, ethyl benzene, right, stuff like that, it is possible to actually have an ototoxic issue. The other thing, right, it's not just these manufacturing chemicals, it's also some of the byproducts, right? Carbon monoxide in and of itself is also an ototoxic hazard chemical. So we all know there's a ton of other hazards, right, that are ton of other injuries that carbon monoxide poisoning can create. But that's just to show that there's a lot more that can affect your hearing when compounded with that increased noise level in the facilities. So how do we protect against that? Thank you, Mark. We have to develop a hearing conservation program, right? And some of these best practices to prevent the hearing loss, right? First and foremost, right, we have to conduct a thorough noise hazard assessment. We have to know what the noise level is that we're protecting against in order to protect against it, right? If we haven't identified that hazard in the area, we don't know what type of hearing protection we have to offer to protect against that. And like Mark said a few slides back, right, a lot of changes have happened in the post-COVID era. And so we've had workers moving from one area of facility to the other for lots of different reasons, whether it be labor shortages or just doing more with less. I think we can all relate to that right, that there's more responsibilities have been put on your shoulders. So you've probably got folks that are moving that used to just be in one area of the facility, now spend part of their shift doing a second job function somewhere else or going back and forth in between those areas. And if they're wearing the same hearing protection in both areas, maybe that's okay. But unless you know what the hazard is in both areas, we really want to evaluate the PPE that our folks are wearing based on the actual hazards they're going to be exposed to. The second piece, right, is we have to instruct our workers on the proper use and fit of those earplugs. Prioritizing fit. I can't emphasize this enough. I can't tell you how many facilities I walk through and I see, people with earplugs sticking halfway out their ear. And yes, that worker may say, hey, I've got it in. I can tell that it's in. It's blocking that noise. I'm protected. But that is just a false sense of security. Okay. Anytime there's a gap in that seal, sound is energy. So some of those noise frequencies, some of that energy is actually penetrating through that gap. CSA did a study a couple of years ago that the difference between a properly fit earplug and an improperly fit earplug can be as high as 20 decibels was their finding, which basically is the difference between having workers be protected versus essentially no protection whatsoever, even though they can't really tell the difference and they can't perceive the amount of noise that's being blocked by that earplug because of the way that sound works and that energy flows through those frequencies. That leads directly into, right, we have to develop a continuous training and testing program. Anytime we make a change to the facility or to the work area or to the job function, we want to retest that area, develop a training program, make sure our folks remember how to properly fit earplugs, remember the importance of these training programs that we put them through. It has to be continuous because, again, of the worker turnover that we have, because of all of the new job functions that we've taken on in this era. It has to be continuous programs. As the workforces and the threat mix changes, again, right? If you bring in a new machine or you're doing a remodel somewhere and you're adding another line, right? That totally adjusts the hazards. So not just the workforce, but also the threat mixes change. And then lastly, right, best practice is utilize fit testing if you can. That ensures adequate protection of the specific product for the specific individual. Again, if you want more information on that, go back, watch some of the archived trainings, the Hearing Basics 101 or the Food and Beverage webinar. I covered some of this in greater detail there. About why it's important, the differences between an NRR and what we call a PAR, or a personalized attenuation rating, making sure that your folks are actually getting the protection that they need from the earplugs or earmuffs that you're providing, versus just assuming that the stamped NRR on the box or on the label is actually the protection that they're going to receive. So how can we help? What does Howard Light do, right? Obviously, we're a manufacturer of PPE. We develop and engineer products specifically with the worker use in mind, right? If you've ever used some of our earplugs, I'll do my shameless plug here. They are super comfortable. They're a lot softer, a lot less dense than some of our competition on the market. Our earmuffs are really great. They're lightweight and super comfortable. That obviously developing and designing great products is the best thing we can do. But from there, right, we don't do any type of noise hazard assessments ourselves. But once you have that assessment hazard done, we do have trained professionals throughout the country that can come out, help you assess what that hazard, or determine what that hazard assessment's actually showing, and make recommendations to help you develop the training program, teach your folks the proper way to use HPDs and hearing protection devices. So we've got a lot of different ways you can help. Please, as always, reach out to your Howard Light representative in your area. We've got folks all over the country, and we are more than happy to help with anything. So I think that leads us into the Q&A. I'll toss it back to Mark.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, I think let me just check to see. I think we have a couple of things in here. Oh, this one was do we think that the reduction in human labor due to AI and robotics will drastically reduce incidents, increase the demand for education, increase the quality and quantity of output? I mean, I think that's what the intent is, right? Like, I think you have different types of incidents. So, you've got to keep clearance in and around. You have a big robot arm that's slinging freshly cut steel. You've got to make sure that there's no hazards in the way of that it's functioning properly, that it's lubricated correctly, and make sure that you're following proper lockout and tagout, right? There's a whole bunch of different, probably like a different ripple effect of those AI and robotic increases to production. But yeah, I think definitely the demand for education and is significant. And I think even some of our own, manufacturing processes on the Howard Light side, just looking at different ways to make an earplug, different sorting techniques, different, seeing eye, right? Like a laser eye that can look at a product and see if that earplug has any, improper shapes or pits or anything, and a little blow of air and it shoots it off of the line. There's a lot of really cool things that are being created. I think one of the examples of investment that we saw, right, in one of our facilities, we have a robotic tying machine. So if you think of a corded pair of earplugs, this is probably the one case where I don't have one just like sitting on my desk, because I typically do. There we go, a pair of Trust Fit earplugs. They get tied, and before they get put into that poly bag, they're tied up so they're nice and neat, and you can just quickly pull them apart, insert as needed. But that tying process, right? We've even seen that our workers can actually tie faster than the machine. Yeah, it's kind of a interesting way to look at output there, but it's really cool. So thanks, I appreciate that, William. Hopefully that answers all your questions. I know you asked them a while ago. We've been talking for quite some time here. I think there were some questions about, will recordings be available? Will content be available? We'll reach out to you as long as you've opted in when you filled this out. We'll send you some additional information. We'll get you a link. There's an outstanding fit guide. I think Kevin didn't even get into some of the things, like when you're looking at a person head on, if you can see the earplug, it's probably not fit correctly. 1/8 of an inch is the difference between protection and non-protection, right? There's all these really quick hitting tips that are in that fit guide. So we'll send out some follow-up information and make sure you can figure out. That's probably one of the first emails you should get from us, and we'll make sure that you have that that additional material, or even access to the database, or some of the commonly asked questions about hearing in manufacturing. And then, yeah, that's, again, send the slides so we can show our supervisors. Love that idea. I think, let me talk to Kevin on how we can do that, or even maybe we'll just send something out to the group afterwards. But I'll note, Joan, you asked that. Thank you.
I'll take
Um,
the next question live, Mark.
yeah, I figured you would. Go for it.
Yeah. So the question for anyone that can't see it, right, is how to handle acute noise exposure levels. So their example that they gave is that over the past month, one of their machines is broken, which is causing the hazard to reach that 85 decibel mark for an 8-hour shift. And they want to, but it'll be fixed in the next month and get back down below that threshold. Um, Treat it like it's permanent is the correct answer. So again, being that it's progressive and that the exposure is cumulative, right? It's a time weighted average exposure limit. So if you've hit that 85 decibel limit for that 8-hour shift, that basically means that your folks, if they're working that 8-hour shift unprotected, will then basically have to stay in a 70 decibel or below environment for the rest of the day when they go home. And we all know that's just not going to happen. Your ears need a chance to recharge, right? It sounds silly, right? You think it's like a cell phone, I got to recharge my battery, but you have to let your ears recover from hitting that permissible exposure limit, time weighted average. So the best way to think about it is, yes, we have that. That's the level at which, 8 hours, 85 decibels, damage can occur, injury can occur. But it's over a 24-hour period, right? So if they take up that entire exposure limit at work, then they've got nothing left over for home. So just provide some basic hearing protection. If they're at that 85 decibels, right, you don't need a ton of attenuation. You can use a really low attenuating earplug. You can use a really, some of the lightest weight earmuffs. The 110 series of our VariShield's a great option. They're super lightweight. Just something temporary to keep that exposure level down. Even just reducing it, 5 or 6 decibels will be enough at that exposure level to keep them at a point where it's safe for them to go and live their life after work.
And I think, like your point of letting your ears recharge. My mother-in-law is hard of hearing and has to wear hearing aids, and she never worked on a manufacturing floor. She worked in a call center. But after that, I mean, you probably like 78, 80 decibels in the call center, but she was going home and sleeping at night wearing a pair of headphones and listening to music throughout the night, and loud enough to drown out her husband snoring. So it all adds up. So you have to think about what you're exposing yourself to, and right, like we're nerds about this sort of thing because we care, right? Like this is super important for us to protect people, but it adds up. So definitely think about those unseen hazards. What is the last one? Any recommendations for or watchouts for digital communication hearing protection? Currently investing for a maintenance team. I think we have Sync Wireless is one of our series that allows for Bluetooth connection and hearing through different things. Like we've tested it with push to talk and other radios. There's also like direct plugins, like I think it's the 3.5 millimeter connection to a radio, or other things that you need, but it passes it through at a safe level. So it's not passing it through above your daily threshold. It's passing it through at a safe and permissible level within your ear cup. So it's those things are awesome, right? It's same as like our Impact series of sports muffs. It's a shooting muff that allows you to amplify everything that's happening around you, hear commands, hear conversations. But when you fire a rifle or a gun at the range, it has a attack time that cuts off and activates the passive hearing. So a lot of really cool technology that goes into these hearing products that to solve your need, right? There's a variety. I think that's why you need to talk to your Howard Light expert. Have Kevin come out and visit you. Trust me, his presentation is even better in person. So, but we really do appreciate it. I think we're over time here, and I think we got to most of the live questions. Other Kevin, truly. So, I don't know if you had anything else you needed to add, but I wanted to say thank you for everyone for joining us, and for our panelists today too.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Mark. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but as you said, this was a great discussion and we appreciate everyone's insights and expertise. Once again, just a reminder from the top of the show today, we hope that you take the time. There'll be a forthcoming evaluation survey and you can give us your feedback. It'll open in a different screen after this webinar. And as always, we appreciate your input as it helps us to improve our future webcasts. With that, we end today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. We'd like to thank Ami Radu, Mark Kirsch, Kevin Sikorsky, everyone at Howard Light Hearing Protection, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a great day.